Hey guys, Travis Turner, Brick and Loft Realty. Just wanted to go over the 1 through 4 family residential contract that you're going to use 99% of the time whenever you're dealing with 1 to 4 units in Texas and you need to write a contract for your client to purchase a listing. So let's jump in. Okay, this is the 1 to 4 family residential contract that you're going to use for Texas real estate sales. This is one of the most common forms you're going to use for any transaction. This is for existing property, anything from a single family unit to 2, 3, and 4 units, which is the 1 to 4. You can even put multiple properties on one contract if you want, or if the lender wants them to be separated, you may have to separate them. But this contract allows you to do quite a bit of things differently in here. But I'm going to walk you through this. Let's go ahead and jump into it because it's kind of a long contract. So at the top, you've got the parties. This is where you're going to put the seller name. Let's just say our seller is John Doe. And we're going to put, if there's 2 sellers, you can obviously have another one, second seller here. There's our 2 sellers. If you need to put a third, you can always comma and then add another one, third seller here. And as many as you need to. Now, this says the parties to contract are X sellers and blank for the buyer. So buyer 1, and then let's say we have buyer 2. Now, for the lot, block, and legal description, this is the legal description here. This is going to be found on the Central Appraisal District. You can find this on whatever county you're working with, Central Appraisal District. You're going to search the address, and you're going to find the legal. So let's just say this is lot 1, block 1 of Texas County, just for fun. Texas County. There's our legal description. In the city of, I'm in Lubbock, so we're just gonna do Lubbock, County of Lubbock. So actually this will be, just say Texas Avenue or something. Lubbock, and then we're gonna have our address. This is the full address here. So whatever the address is, 1111 Main Street, Texas Ave, Lubbock, Texas. There's our full address for the property. Improvements, anything that's built into the property has to stay with the property. That includes, ceiling fans, any appliances that are built into the property, things like fridges and microwaves that are not mounted into the wall. Those items don't have to stay with the property. Washer and dryer, all those are non-realty items that can be negotiated but do not have to stay with the property. Anything built in or affixed to the property, screwed in, TV mounts, that kind of thing. The TV can go, the TV mount would have to stay because that's affixed to the property. So that's any kind of improvements, unless the seller otherwise dictates, and then you can put that in the exclusions box here, which the seller is going to take. Typically, they would have to replace it if they take their favorite chandelier. They need to put a chandelier or something in its place that's agreed upon by the buyer. Sales price, this is where we're going to put our cash portion. Let's say that they're paying all cash and the property is $200,000. We can put $200,000 here. That's going to automatically fill in the sales price. In C, let's just say that it's cash. We don't need third-party financing addendum. We don't need loan assumption, and we don't need seller financing, so all these can be blank. If we're doing an FHA or a conventional note and they're going to put some money down, let's just do conventional for easy math. That's going to be 5%, which is going to be $10,000 down, and then we're going to need to put in our loan amount here. That totals up to $200,000. We got $10,000 down, $190,000 in a loan. Now we need our third-party financing addendum check. This is going to be what you're going to use about 90% of the time, 99% of the time, unless you're doing an owner finance deal or assuming a loan of a property, which is pretty rare. Leases, if the property is an investment property, you're going to need to check residential leases here. This is box A. Typically, you will do fixture leases if they have anything. It says in here, solar panels, propane tanks, water softeners, security systems, things like that. Natural resource leases, this is not going to be used very often because you're going to be dealing with 1 to 4 actual property, so there's not going to be a whole lot of natural resources that even transfer. So most of the time, you will leave this one blank. You may check residential leases and you may not. Moving on to page 2, here's our earnest money and our termination option. So you're going to deliver the earnest money and the option fee to the title company that you guys agree on and you choose. So let's just say one that we use in Tenalot is Service Title Loop. So we're going to say Service Title Loop here. You can put the address of the title company if you'd like. You put the address of the title company there. Then you're going to put your earnest money and then you're going to put your option money. Make sure you read these blanks right because you don't want to get them out of order because they're very different amounts. The earnest money is typically 1% of a contract. Okay, 1% of the sales price. If you're representing the buyer and you want your offer to be stronger, you may increase that money to look better for the seller. Or if you're looking out for them, you may end up doing a little bit less, totally up to what you want to do here. It's all negotiable, but at the same time, the standard is about 1%. The option fee typically is about 10 days. It's already auto-filled here, which normally we'd put the option fee in ourselves. 10 days. This can also be negotiated to any set days. You can do 0 all the way to infinity. If you want to negotiate this, standard is about 10 days. This is the period that your client has to back out of the contract for any reason without losing their earnest money, which we put up here. So for simple reasons, we're going to put $100. This can also be increased to show more seriousness in an offer and strengthen your offer. Additional earnest money can be negotiated. Most of the time, you're going to leave this alone. You can amend the contract later and extend the option period if you need extra days. Let's just negotiate it all up front. We have our termination option. This is effective with the effective date of the contract, and day 1 will start the next day. So if it's January 1st and you accept the deal, January 11th is going to be your end of your termination option, and that happens at 5 p.m. on the local time. So just make sure you're watching your dates, watching your time, because once this period's over, that $2,000 that your client is putting down in earnest is now locked in, and if they back out of the contract for any reason it's not acceptable by other terms in this contract, they are going to lose that $2,000 to the seller at minimum. You have to deliver the earnest money to title within a certain amount of time, okay? So your time is going to be within the first 3 days of your executed contract. So we execute on the 1st of January, the money is going to be delivered on the 4th or sooner. I would say, just by rule of thumb, make sure you have it by the 2nd day of an accepted contract, just to make sure you're always within your window. That can be wire or that can be check. If they're going to mail a check and they don't live in the same city, then make sure you either go, if they do live in the same city, go pick it up. And if they don't, have them overnight it to you or to the title company and make sure it gets there. The title policy and survey. Title policy can be negotiated with the seller, and it can be negotiated as the buyer expense. It's going to be the same title company that's doing the deal up top. So we're going to put service title loop here. 99% of the time, a title policy is a seller expense because it shows a free and clear title with no liens or encumbrances on the property. If your buyer is experiencing multiple offers with their contract, it may be something that they want to pay for instead of having the seller pay for it because it makes their offer look better. Typically, a title policy is about 0.6% of sales price. So we have, a $200,000 property is going to be close to $1,000 to $1,200 for a title policy on this type of property. It's based on the sales price. Your next decision here is will not be amended or will be amended to read shortages in the area. This is for easements and encroachments based on the survey. So if you have a platted property in the city limits that's been built since the 1940s and sold 20 times, you do not need to amend to read shortages in the area at the expense of the buyer and seller. Typically, either that client's going to know there's an easement or there's not one existing. Typically, when you ever pay for this, it's going to be because the property is rural, you're on multiple acres, and you want to make sure that there's no liens or easements on the property. And so you can choose who pays for this. It's about $100 expense, and you can pick who would pay for that here. You're going to get the title commitment within about 20 days. The title company will get the title commitment. You'll be able to read each section of the commitment, and from there, if there's anything that needs to be negotiated or fulfilled, sometimes the seller has to fulfill obligations or things come up. You're going to have time to do that as long as they do it within a right timely manner. Survey. The survey is 99.9% of the time a buyer cost. The reason for this is because the buyer's lender requires the survey. So what we will do is we have 1, 2, and 3 options. Number 1, if you read this carefully, what you're going to do is you're going to either put however many days. I usually put about 15. So within 15 days of the executed contract, the seller shall furnish to buyer and title company the seller's existing survey of the property. Okay, so even if we check 15 and put buyer here, there's still something the seller has to do. The seller has to furnish to buyer the existing survey, and they have to fill out a T47 affidavit basically saying that the survey is up to date as far as they know. In the bold here, if seller fails to furnish the existing survey or affidavit within the time prescribed, the buyer shall obtain a new survey no matter what at the seller's expense no later than 3 days prior to closing date. If the existing survey is provided and is not acceptable to the title company for reasons of maybe they built a new shop after they bought it and there's new concrete and the survey no longer is accepted, then seller or buyer would pay for this. A lot of agents will check number one, put however many days, and put the buyer will pay for it, and then send it to the seller to look at, and it looks like the buyer is going to pay for a survey, when in fact that is not true at all. You need to make sure to read the whole thing. Number two, this is the one where the buyer will just pay for their own survey if the seller can still provide a copy. So this is one of the more common options. This is number two. The seller can still provide a copy, and that way the buyer doesn't have to pay the expense, but just in case they don't have one, the buyer is going to pay for a new one. Number three, the seller has to pay for a new survey. Surveys are about $378 unless you have acres or more. If you're starting to get into more land, the survey expense is going to go up because it's going to take more work. Objections: a lot of agents will put single family residence, duplex, triplex or quadplex or whatever kind of property the land is supposed to be zoned as, and then they'll put typically 3 days here. I don't typically put a whole lot in here, but you are welcome to do so. The title notices, the one that's most important: membership in property owners association. Is it or is it not in an HOA? You can mark it here. If it is, you're going to have to get paperwork showing all the information for the property owners association, and there's a separate document to include with this if it is in fact in an HOA. Statutory tax districts, tidewaters, annexation, located in an area with utility service providers, public improvement districts, transfer fees, propane gas, and water level fluctuations. You're going to know based on your area and the property which ones it's located in. For our area here in Lubbock, we don't have a statutory tax district. We don't have any tidewaters. If the property is already in your county, then you're already annexed as long as it's not outside the city limits. Most of the time, your property is going to have a utility service provider, somebody providing utilities. Public improvement district, you can find them on the tax rolls if it's in a PID. They're pretty rare. It runs as an HOA, but it's paid through your taxes. There's no transfer fees in Texas. And propane gas system service area, you may have a house with propane gas system. You just need to let them know. And notice of water level fluctuations. In Lubbock, we're pretty dry. We don't have this. Property condition and access and inspections. What this is saying is during your option period, you're going to more than likely get the property inspected. You're going to hire an inspector to go in the house, check the plumbing, electrical, roof, the ins and outs of the whole thing, and then you're going to be able to negotiate those repairs with the seller. They're going to provide you what's called a seller's disclosure notice. That's a 5 or 6 page document most of the time. Sometimes they use the more simple version, which is about a 3-page document. If they provide this document, you will check buyer has received the notice. If you have not, then you'll check the buyer has not received the notice. You typically want this within the about 2 to 4 days. My standard is 3 days. The cool thing about this blank is the termination option up top that we filled out that talks about our option period. Well, if you don't have the seller's disclosure up front and then they give it to you, you actually have a built-in seller option period here. So if the seller delivers this notice, the buyer may terminate the contract for any reason within 7 days after the buyer receives that notice. So if you receive it day 2, you get 7 days from there to terminate the contract, even if your termination option period up in page 2 says 0 for 0 days of option period. So it's a second built-in out here if you need it. And if you don't get it at all, then you can back out anytime before closing if you so choose. Sometimes the seller is not required to furnish one. This is typically if a property is inherited or somebody's passed away, that kind of thing, or a lot of times on new construction, you won't need to furnish a seller's disclosure notice. Seller's disclosure of lead-based paint. If the property is older than 1978 or built in 1978, you're going to have a lead paint disclosure. That's a 1-page document that you can find in all the document list. Acceptance of property condition as is. You're basically going to accept the property as is here. You don't want to limit yourself to what you only can see in the property already and then put it here, because after you get your inspection done, it's going to bring up more things that you may want to negotiate. So what we're going to do is we're going to accept it as is, blank 1. We're going to amend the contract with a repair list after our inspector goes through the house and still in our option period. We want to make sure that does not lapse, and then we try to negotiate repairs. We want to do it before the option period is over. So if the seller and the buyer cannot come to an agreement, you can back out of the contract. Lender required repairs and treatments. This is in reference to FHA and VA loans. If the VA and FHA appraiser walk the property and determine that there needs to be some lender required repairs, they're going to make a list, send it to you through the appraisal, and then you're going to have to negotiate these with the seller. Most of the time, the seller we'll take care of these. And if not, you're going to have to work it out, or your buyer can back out and get their money back. But these are required repairs and treatments in order for the loan to process for the buyer. The completion of repairs and treatments, everything pretty much has to be completed before closing unless otherwise agreed upon and negotiated in the contract. Residential service contracts, this is a home warranty. Typically those are about $600. If you want to negotiate one for your client, you can here. If you're in a multiple offer situation, a lot of times you want to leave that blank because the more simple and less money the seller pays on your behalf for your buyer, the better. Brokers and sales agents, if you're a licensed agent in Texas, you have to disclose that. Or if you're making an offer on a property that the seller is an agent, you have to put seller is licensed agent in Texas, or buyer is licensed agent in Texas. Closing, you can mark your closing date. Closings are typically 30 days out. Here, today's January 15th, 2023. So we could do sometime in February, maybe February 24th. Find a date that works for your client. But typically you're going to need about 30 days for the lender, if not more. Make sure you know exactly what time frame they're going to need. These are all the things that you're going to get at closing, and it's going to happen throughout the process of closing. You can read through that when you have some time. Possession, upon closing and funding, this is when the buyer is going to get keys and get to move into the property. We're not going to do according to a temporary lease. Most of the time, you can do a temporary lease outside of the contract if you'd like. Sometimes that comes up towards the end of the contracts if dates and things need to change. But for now, upon closing and funding is what we're going to check. That means whenever the money transfers from the bank to the title company and checks are cut and everything is funded, then the buyer is released the keys and given access to the home to move in their stuff and whatnot. Special provisions, this is only for additional information needed. You're not going to put any kind of repair request or washer and dryer, that kind of stuff in here. That's going to be on a non-realty item addendum for appliances and extra furniture and things like that to stay. This is more for anything else that may be special for like something the seller will need to do, or information for the title company in order to process the file. 12, settlement other expenses. This little blank here is for closing assistance. So this is going to go for if you want to negotiate any kind of repair allowance, carpet allowance, closing assistance, anything like that, that can go in this blank. And this will be a credit that will be given to the buyer on the HUD statement. So whenever they bring their down payment and they owe their closing costs, this amount here will go towards their closing costs and closing costs alone. You cannot ask and put in this blank to cover closing costs and down payment, because it will not trickle to the down payment if you ask for more than what the closing is. If you ask for more than what the closing is, use the excess to buy down the rate. Otherwise, the seller will get the difference back and your buyer will not get to use it. Prorations, depending on where you live, taxes may be handled differently. In Lubbock, taxes are paid for at the end of the year, all in bulk. And so if you close any time throughout the year, they're going to be prorated. This will be shown on the HUD statement. The buyer will be given a credit for the taxes depending on the date that they purchased, and then they will owe the full tax amount at the end of the year. Casualty loss, default mediation, basically anything out of the seller's control. If something were to happen, an act of God, and it destroys the property, of course, they can terminate the contract. The buyer can get their earnest money back. Default, if anybody fails to comply with the contract, there's specific performance that can be executed on either side, if so chosen. Mediation, attorney fees, before anybody got attorneys involved, try to sit down, work everything out with each other, make sure we don't have to get attorneys involved because it gets really expensive, and typically it's not going to be worth the amount of money that you'd receive back from actually going through all the trouble, all the time spent, things like that. Escrow is going to be the money held at the title company. You can read through this on your own time. Representations, who represents who, read through this. That'll be buyer, buyer agent representing, or the selling agent representing the buyer, and the listing agent representing the seller. Federal tax requirements, you can read through that. Notices, you can put here, it says to buyer at, and it has their address, city, state, zip code. You can either put their address here. A lot of times I'll just put their name. So I'll put, let's just say our buyer is John Doe. I'll put his name here. It'll put it right up here. And then I'll put their phone number and their email. Down here is a list of the agreements that will be attached to the contract. You can do third party. You can do, if the property's older than 1978 here, you can do the seller's disclosure of lead-based paint. A lot of the times you're going to attach an addendum concerning right to terminate due to lender's appraisal. You only need this document if it's going to be a conventional loan, anything else besides an FHA or VA, because FHA and VA loans have this built into their contracts. But this, let's say it's a conventional loan, we're going to add this here. If your client needs to sell a house to buy this house and you have to do a contingency contract, that's called the addendum for sale of other property. and you can check that here. If you have a non-realty item addendum and you're negotiating furniture or appliances, you can add that to the other and type in non-realty item addendum. Anything else in this list that you need to add, you can. Here's property subject to mandatory membership in Property Owners Association. If it has an HOA, you can click here and so forth. You can read through these as you need them. A lot of times you're not going to have attorneys involved, so you can leave this blank. Here's an important date. Here's the executed date of the contract. If we negotiated everything today on the 15th and everybody signs on both of these blanks of the contract, then that's the executed date. If you present the offer today and the seller does not sign until the 17th of January, the executed date will be the 17th. That's when everybody's signed. And then from there, that's when all the dates of the contract spin off. Down here, you'd put your broker's information. Here's my broker information. You're going to have your name, your license number, your email, phone number, whoever your supervisor is, their number, your address for your brokerage, your company here. And then if you're the buyer agent sending to the seller, it's common courtesy to go ahead and fill out all of their information for them on the contract. This is one of the most important blanks here at the bottom. This is your commission. Make sure not to leave this blank. Typically, you're going to get 3% for a sale. Look on the listing to see what percent they're offering, because whatever is on the multiple listing service is what goes, not what you put on the contract. So if you put 3% here, see nobody signs here. If you put 3% and on the MLS it says 2, you're going to get paid 2 at closing, even though you thought you were getting 3. You can try to negotiate this up front. That's the easiest way to do it. Otherwise, go ahead and take what they're going to give you and do the deal. Take little wins and keep moving forward. This is where they're going to receipt all the earnest, option, and contract receipt, things like that at the title company in. And that is your 10-page contract. Happy selling.